Neptune-Figaro.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Thank
How
you
are
for
you guys?
joining us this morning. We appreciate you taking time. We're trying to add new, fresh, young voices.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Steve's only concern was if you're cute.
At least my husband thinks so.
Well,
There you go. And that's what counts.
That was well put there. My husband thinks so. So
There you
stop
go.
right there. Very well, strategically said.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate. I know it was a long request, but I'm here today. So
not a problem. We understand that you're quite busy, and we appreciate you taking time to talk to us.
Yeah.
Now, you are based at UWI in Augustine campus.
yes, I am.
And I saw your presentation at the Crime Symposium. Crime was the national health concern of the symposium, which that part of it focused a lot on radicalized youth. If you could give us a synopsis of that presentation for those who may not have seen or heard about it, so we have some context.
Okay.
Please.
So they asked me to talk about youth and crime, and one of the things we never really talked about is why they do get involved in criminality. And one aspect of it that we really hardly ever touch on is radicalization, radical behavior. So while I was at the university, I have been working, and also worked with one of my colleagues, Dr. Michael Pawinski, and we have been collecting data and doing interviews, trying to figure out youth violence, not only the spectrum of gangs and gang membership, but also why would they want to be vulnerable, or why are they vulnerable to these radical organizations, and particularly in 2015 and 2016 ISIS, right? We were really truly targeted, and that's probably because we had a lot of vulnerabilities in our society, cracks in our society, and they saw an opportunity to get a lot of recruitment from Trinidad and Tobago. And we had to find the answers by what is going on with our young population and make them so vulnerable to go to this war-torn, radicalized nation, not seeing our country as paradise. And so we did a lot of interviews, and even prior to joining, collaborating with him, with Dr. Poinski, I did some interviews uh, of 2017, and we found so many underlying issues within our society that might have pushed people to become radicalized. Radicalized to go to ISIS, to support ISIS, and also to support violence on the whole. So one of the things that I spoke about in the symposium is the marginalization of young persons, especially in specific communities. With that research, I coupled it with going to do a lot of community visits with the assistance of the interagency task force. I went into Laventille, parts of Chaguanas, communities throughout Trinidad and Tobago that are known for crime-ridden and gang behavior. And it just was an eye opener to a lot of issues that young persons contend with: unemployment, poor role modeling, the fact that government agencies turn a blind eye to them, being stereotyped, being stigmatized as being having negative influences, not getting jobs. So a lot of they actually had a voice and a platform to talk about some of the issues that they contend with and the reasons why they have really pushed into gang violence, pushed into radicalization, and even pushed into a situation where they turn against members of society, like indulging in robberies and burglaries and so forth. So it was a very eye-opening research, especially going onto the field and having discussions with young persons, and especially those who were members of specific gangs. So that's pretty much what it was about, the presentation. But radicalization in its entity, especially in 2015, we saw not only people going to fight alongside ISIS, but we had a lot of young people felt that there was no other avenue for them to pretty much excel or have acceptance in society. And one of
So
the
is it that
vulnerable.
they felt that hopeless about their position in Trinidad and Tobago? Is that a synopsis of it?
Yes, they did, and also coupled with just an organization pride, like they were preying on the vulnerabilities of young persons. Here, what in Trinidad and Tobago, you can't find a job, We are here for you. So they play on their emotions as well. The entire recruitment process of ISIS was basically something that was so strategic, and to place young persons in a position where they felt like this is the hope I am looking for. I have no job. I have to always indulge in this type of behavior. But best I do it for a purpose. And they stated their purpose. Their purpose was to help others, to make sure that their organization was doing what is good for the people of the world, and assisting individuals. So they use this as a platform, to garner young persons who would have felt like they needed to do more. They didn't really have much going on, physically, financially, emotionally in our country. And so we had to look at what were cracks in our society and how we actually failed young persons moving forward, and especially in the past. Yeah.
What is Dr. Neptune-Figaro, good morning, by the way. Tell me something. Is it that the cracks first developed at the point of the family unit? Was that what your research indicated? And why didn't the education system redress it or redress the imbalance if that was what was happening in the home?
Right. So based on the interviews and the discussions, a lot of family members, they do have some responsibility. I won't say all of them, but because based on the interviews, a lot of family members said they didn't know, they would never encourage a type of allegiance to any radical organization. But a lot of the conversations that I've had with these young persons, it would seem that gang membership and indulgence in crime and criminality was very normal because of the circumstances that they were placed into. So young persons generally live in communities where gang members, well, the interviews that I did, in communities where they have a lot of criminality or involved in a lot of crime, and they're learning from older generations. And this is not even recent older generations, I mean generations 15, 20 years ago, that this is the way we have to survive. And moving through generation, you would see that the family members do encourage it. This is their means of survival. However, institutions have also failed them. While they never said anything negative about the educational system, more so they look at what are their opportunities outside the educational system. So they will go to school and then after be looking for 3-4 years to find something that is plausible to have income. And when you have discussions with the young persons, they will say, I will go to this one. And they'll say, where do you live? And they will not get any opportunities. And they said they're not looking for a large sum of money. People will think that, but they're actually looking for a way to have social mobility. And so the family system is one avenue. And they will talk about how their families in gang membership, but they'll also say that their families in gang membership, one, because of the culture of the area, but also two, because that is their only means of getting income to support their families. Now, this is not to say that the only reason why they join gangs, because obviously some of them would like the idea of being a gang, being a part of, but similar to the ISIS recruitment, a lot of them depend on them emotionally. They are part of an organization. They feel psychologically bonded to these gang members and these gang commitments. So at the end of the day, the institutions themselves are playing a very minor role in terms of giving them opportunities outside of this mindset, role modeling, helping them to elevate in certain circumstances, to become not a part of what they're accustomed to in their communities. Yeah.
Do you well, when you pose these statements to state agencies, no matter who is in power, the response is generally, well, we have programs that persons can get into. There's YTEP, there's this, there's that. We have apprenticeship programs, and they don't want that, and they just want to get into crime. Is it that the programs that exist, and including programs that foster a sense of belonging, like Girl Guides and Scouts, etc. Is it that the young people in these communities don't feel that those particular types of programs are aligned to their cultural reality or their social reality, or is it something else at play here?
So one of the things that I actually knew, I didn't even know before, is that a lot of these programs they are unaware of. So I met with a person from social development, and they were giving me a list of programs, and I was asking them in the interviews, do you know of this program, parenting program, mentorship programs? And I'm showing the different organizations that provide these programs. They are unaware of it. So first and foremost, I don't know how they pose these programs to these groups. But they do have Mila, my part, these programs, white up that they actually target them. But a lot of them, even though they use these programs, there's a force that is stronger than these programs, and it's more about who is around them, and especially young persons, the vulnerability of peer groups, the vulnerability of instant gratification, just the vulnerability of them being providers at a very young age. So you're going to these programs, but you still have to make sure you have money to help your parents or siblings provide some level of finances to the household. So at the end of the rainbow, they still want to know, how do I earn money? So all these programs are fine, but what happens after that? So I sat with 5 or 6 young people. They're like, I have no job. What am I to do? I will enter these programs, and if I don't get a contract, get involved in a contract, or if I don't get a job, I do have to find some means of living. We go to program, we understand that the programs are helpful, because one of the, for example, one of the persons that I interviewed, he did a trade, plumbing and electrical, and he said that the jobs are far and few in between, and there's it's very difficult for people to say, I am going to hire you. They don't trust persons within the area, and also the area itself have a culture where they don't trust persons coming from outside, coming into the area. And so I figured from the interviews that the programs themselves don't assist in terms of connecting with the real problems that are faced within those communities. And one of the major things I think is that when you hear about who and what and why they behave the way they behave, you look at the persons that are most influential in their lives. And people that are most influential are gang members, and they teach them an alternative way. This alternative or parallel society that they live in is much more forceful than the contemporary mainstream society that we live in. And so if you come out of our society where we understand this is wrong, this is right, this is how you're supposed to behave, this is the way in which that this is the way you legitimately earn money, they don't know that level of thinking. They know survival, joining a gang member, having the opportunity to gain money. And it's not only because they like the idea of being in gangs, it's because this is all that is being fostered with them in these communities.
You know, it just seems like such a complex human problem, because you're talking about being in a particular environment where certain forces are what are motivating you and motivating your behavior. How does the state begin to even intervene in rectifying that kind of behavior? I mean, would you have any suggestions, or what have you put your mind to that?
I do,
Yeah.
because I've done so much research on it over the years. One thing I would say is that the police service is doing a lot just by being with IATF and seeing them going through these communities and having conversations. I see how much they're doing in terms of understanding the communities, knowing who are the gang members. I also met with persons from building blocks. They've been disbanded now from national security, but they have a very vivid idea of persons in communities. They have taught persons from retaliating, having revenge killings. And so the aspect of the police service, I know we put a lot of emphasis on the police service and national security, but there are so many other institutions that need to pull their weight. When you look at social development, I'm not saying that they're not doing anything, but a lot of I will draw on an example because to give you a better idea. So I went to one of the communities, and there is a community center. The community center, especially during COVID, they were not giving any persons to assist with young persons in whom with homework, no internet access so that they can log on to their classes. There's no facilities in the community center, no recreational activities. So no parenting advice. Young persons were telling me some of the challenges they face in terms of being violated, being victims indirectly when their parents or their siblings have been killed. Nobody comes to assist them in terms of the psychological trauma that they face. So there are other entities that has to deal with the minds of young persons, not only equipping them with the finances, but also equipping them with a support. So I saw even agricultural initiatives within the community, and they say, well, why don't they help invest, even though there are some limitations and challenges, they want somebody to invest in them being able to do agriculture within their community, give them some aid and some sort of training in the community for doing handiwork or plumbing. And so one of the things I think the institutions that are aligned within the government of Trinidad and Tobago, like the social services, persons who are within the education system, could tailor programs towards these communities specifically. I know it is a lot of work, but we cannot only focus on national security, protecting and saving. We have to kind of go a little bit deeper into understanding some of the programs we need to put in these communities. Offer them the same on the job training and give them opportunities after the job to after the training to get a employment. And more so, I see the need for good role modeling. While there are a lot of persons who just lost and want guidance, the gangs are guiding them. And
I'm
so,
glad you said that. How much are we underestimating? Because having programs is one thing, but on designing the programs with an understanding of how aggressive and organized gangs are at
mhm,
recruiting is something else. Because if you have, is like an example I like to give. A child plays a video game that is going at 60 frames per second
mhm,
and fast edited and exciting. And then you put that child in a blackboard with a teacher with a piece of chalk. Which one is the child going to be attracted to more? The video game, because it's more
right,
stimulating for very many different reasons. The programs are there. There are a lot of programs out there because I know them myself. But the gangs are also understanding the vulnerabilities that have developed in particular communities
exactly.
and are aggressively and more effectively catering and targeting young people in terms of this is what they're offering, but this is what we're offering in your situation. How much is the state underestimating how organized and aggressive these gangs are at recruitment?
I think they're very much underestimating it because one of the things I know we target the gangs, we try to arrest and try to have information on the activities of the gangs, but I don't think that they're putting a lot of emphasis on the recruitment process of these gangs, especially how they recruiting individuals within the school system. So very young, they have this recruitment process. What I understood, and I understand from the jump that this is a very difficult process to break because sometimes young persons they understand that they have to get into a gang by the time they reach a specific age or they are aiming towards a gang at a specific age. The mindset of young persons in these communities, a lot of communities are geared towards that. And that is the hardest part, breaking or trying to change the way in which young persons are thinking now. Also you have a lot of negative influence with the music and seeing persons that they look up to with the gold chains and driving really nice cars, and they're looking at this and saying, this is what I want to emulate, this is what I want to become. So the mindset of young persons are changing, and we didn't do anything to break this mindset. It is more attractive to them. Just like the video game, it's more attractive. And this is why a lot of the emphasis is not on policing, it's more about changing and seeing how we could bear their behavior and their thinking towards something that is more acceptable or pro-social in society. And that is very, very difficult. So when people say the police are not doing anything, we also have to look also at what is going on in the way that they think, the culture that we are emphasizing in our society. This culture of wear gold chain and get a part of this, have a gun. And if you're listening to that type of music and seeing people actually excelling and becoming successful in that type of world, this is what you want to become in that society. So if there is only that type of, or that strong type of gang initiation, organization, and role modeling and influence with young persons, we pretty much setting them up to be on that side of the fence, right? So we have to actually, even if it's to say one or two or three, we have to interject some of our resources into becoming, okay, this is the other side of the fence. What about using these skill sets to do audio engineering or sound, like, so they will be able to understand that there are alternatives to stealing a car. You could actually become a mechanic and still make legitimate money. So it's also about not only policing them, but also trying to guide young persons from a very young age. Okay, you
But
don't have.
haven't they in many cases just rejected that outright and said, well, I don't want that life. That is not the life my father did and he did well, and that is not the life my friend did and he did well. And so the idea that because we are socialized a particular way, you and I, maybe Richard and Steve, that doesn't mean it's going to be attractive to them, because they come from a culture that in large measure has rejected that established societal structure and clung to a new structure.
Yeah, and that's why it's very difficult to break at this point. And so while we have the hard policing where we have to arrest and make sure that, there is a sense of punishment, and that is also important, the sanctioning of these types of behaviors. On the other end, you have to also try with the newer generation to inject a new sense of thinking. This is going to be a long, very winded process of years of trying to change that level of thinking. It's not going to be a hard and fast thing, but at least if we have one or two or three of young persons who said, I learned differently from a very young age, that there is another light and another influence. But I understand that a lot of them will be very much attracted to that lifestyle. I understand that the culture that they culminate in these societies are going to attract them. And while we will hope that um, they just change their minds, which is not going to happen, but we still could have the influence on younger generations. This is
What
why
is your research giving us about we talk about a lot about men and boys for obvious reasons, but your research is also focused a lot on what's happening with women and girls and children, because sometimes we don't understand that many girls and women are part of that type of life also, and are also very targeted.
Yes. So I did a specific focus group on women in these communities, um, and the vulnerabilities at a very young age are there. I feel like from a basic conversation that they are basically they're taught that they are supposed to behave a specific type of way in those communities, and it's okay to be violated. It's okay to support from a young age, especially mothers encourage them from a young age that this is how you're supposed to act in these communities. One of the major things I learned is that women, they generally don't have conversations about what are their opportunities outside of being involved with somebody from a gang. I was very taken aback about how many of them have been abused at a very, very young age, and we don't like to talk about it. But seems like they're being programmed to think this is the way that your life is supposed to be. You support the gang members. This is how you're supposed to live, and this is survival. So a lot of times people will be not understanding that as a woman, you could go out and work, you could earn for yourself, you don't have to be impregnated by a young man, you don't have to support the gang membership. But this is the same thing that is happening. And you see that from a very young age, they're taught that this is the way that they're supposed to be in these communities. And so gang membership, supporting gang members become actually a norm, a social norm in these communities. And the conversations that they have, some of them now, because a lot of the gang members that they probably were aligned with have been killed, or and now they're on the breadline, they're like, what are the opportunities that we have? And I see a lot of them trying to change their level of thinking more so than the men. They're like, we want to see if we could get a trade, somebody to teach us to sew, so we could like do a little clothing store. And if we could have some people come in and help us understand how to raise our children effectively so they don't get involved in crime. But sometimes when she's one of the conversations that we're having, she said, you have to understand that this here in our community is more survival than anything else. And understanding that we have to align ourselves with gang members in order to have sufficient finances and to have resources is very normal for us. But we are looking for opportunities outside. So I asked about, trying to sign up for the mentorship program as well as parenting programs to know how to move forward with young girls in the community, how to understand how to parent outside of gang membership. And they had no indication of how to even start that process. Not even a process of getting ID cards or understanding how to sign up for specific jobs. They were very unaware because they have been channeled to think that this is their in all and end all. There's no other avenue for them to move forward. And so again, I emphasize for women, especially with their children, these programs being catered to these communities. And people always think about, their level of thinking, their mindset. We can't change that. If they want it, they'll come for it. But just working with building blocks project, they're inside these communities trying to figure out how can I help you, and there are people willing to go and help them get jobs and understand how to get an ID card, how to fill out an application form, what programs are available to them get training. Now, this is just one program, but if we have fostered enough of these programs in these communities, I think that we'll be able to touch women specifically and help them maintain a lot of these positive influences when they're parenting. I have seen it. I saw in some communities where there are people who just don't want to be in gangs, and they just on the breadline. They have to rely on persons with pension to cut their grass to get a little bit of finances, and the woman to go out and try to sell specific items and come back in the community to help the community as a whole. So there is still some hope. Looking at the communities, there is some hope of parents who want to steer their children in the right direction, especially young women who are vulnerable and who were very much channeled and programmed to think that gang membership is all that they would have to be involved in.
So is it an issue of, because I'm hearing you in terms of all of the dynamics of the various communities, is it an issue of the state looking at a particular kind of template that reflects all of that and saying, okay, we need to very much aggressively post more resources into certain directions in mitigating or sending a different message? Is it as clinical as that? Is it as clinical as that in terms of making some breakthrough in that kind of situation?
I think one size fit all is not going to work in some of these communities. And I went to multiple communities with multiple problems. So I don't think it's a clinical fix. I think it's diving into the specifics of each community. There's specific needs and there are specific programs to be tailored. You can't have an overarching program and expect it to fit into all these communities. I don't think that will work. I think that we have to segment these communities and assess what the needs are, a needs assessment, and see how we could gradually over a period of time, 10, 15 years, look at the long-term effects that it would have. And I think that fleshing out these communities where young persons are negatively influenced and they have barriers to success is the first step of going forward. But it has to have an assessment of these communities that what that needs to be targeted. Or because when I went to Chaguanas, it's completely different to what is happening in the Port of Spain area. And they say crime and gangs are happening, but I just think that it's a different context, it's a different environment, and there are specific challenges that are met in these communities.
What are your recommendations for changes in the education system to help deal with these issues?
The education system is pivotal, and I have not honestly heard negative things from the community members with regards to the educating of young persons. And the schools are doing a lot. Like they're having counselors coming to the school, they're reporting to they have also partnered with social development and are reporting specific type of situation. What we have to remember is that teachers are coming there to teach, and they also have a lot other things that they're contending with, especially when they see some of the challenges or vulnerabilities of young persons within the school system. The education system is overburdened at this point, especially in these communities, because not only are teachers acting as, teachers, they're also acting as counselors, they're also acting as social workers. So I think we should have programs aligned in these schools. I think the programs that are going to be aligned in the schools is adding more staff in the schools, not in the Ministry of Education, in the schools to deal, and even though they have school counselors, they do have social workers they're attached, but vividly actually actively taking part in the schools, especially when we had a upsurge in the school fights. And this has come out of COVID because we don't know what is happening in these homes. Counselors, and then actually having programs to get these students towards it, especially after school. I also think it's very, very important to funnel them out of the school system into what would be to programs which would give them a level of income. Now, I know we do have them, but specifically there are persons who you need to pay attention to, that when they're into these programs, getting a lot of getting employment is very, very difficult. So it should be understanding opportunities outside of the school system, so you don't educate them and leave them and say, okay, there is nothing else for you, go find a job. We should have these programs aligned within the school system and helping them to find opportunities outside of the school system. But I think programs should be aligned with the school system itself, because this is where you're going to capture a lot of young persons who may be joining gangs. They may be trying to figure out what is my next step, and then they lead into the wrong direction. Continuous counseling, continuous workshops. It is a lot for the school system, but they should have programs aligned with the education system to deal with that, because it is only so much the teachers could do. So there should be other levels of employment that would help aid in bringing them, funnel them out of the school system into having employment, into having opportunities, into having positive role modeling.
I don't know if you're willing to take some calls, because sometimes our audience has very specific questions based on their experiences. I'll advise them that none of the questions are to be politically directed because you can't answer them. So I don't know if you're willing to take a couple of calls. If so, we open the phone lines, 222-TALK, 8255, sorry, 866-525-1099 if you're outside of Trinidad and Tobago. One of the issues you also focused on is the migrant situation, particularly Venezuelan migrants, and how you think that is now impacting our criminal scenario, if at all, in Trinidad and Tobago.
All right. So I did a paper, did a research last year, just looking at the crimes that they commit within Trinidad and Tobago, and it was significantly low in terms of minor crimes, very few serious crimes like murders or anything of that nature. That's not to say that they don't get involved in crimes, but locals or Trinidadians have been more so the main culprits of serious crimes. So now Dr. Sipasad have conducted prison research, and this was in conjunction with Impact. And we realized that a lot of small arms have been entering our country via means, not all of it, but via means of Venezuelan vessels, right? So what we are looking at now with the immigrants, while they may be trying to survive in Trinidad and Tobago and be a part of the system, and they do have involvement in minor crimes, we haven't found them being involved in major crimes in the country. However, with the trafficking, we see that there's an indirect relationship between the number of guns coming in the country and then that equates into much more gun violence in Trinidad and Tobago. So we look to see whether there are networks around in and around Trinidad and Tobago that help support the entrance of these firearms, especially when they talk about vessels. So the interviews that we did with a lot of prisoners, they kind of speak towards having connections within Venezuela regarding drug trafficking, the connections that they have to specific organizations. But the research that we're doing is very new. It's very at this point primary. So we're trying to figure out how these immigrants tend to impact on gang violence in Trinidad and Tobago. But the one thing that we looked at so far is basically the inclusion of illicit guns within our country. And that equates into a lot more gang violence. Young persons have guns rapidly at this point in time. So we're trying to figure out the source of these illicit weapons, and we see some connection with trafficking from Venezuela.
What surprised you most about your studies, your this particular endeavor, this exercise, when you completed it or when you were completing it in the process of it?
I think I see a face to criminality. I think that surprised me the most because when you have conversations with persons who are in gangs, you realize regardless of them holding a gun, they are human. And I kind of, people dehumanize them, these gang members, but I see the human aspect of it. I see where they've come from, some of the adversity that they face. I'm not saying that it's right for them to pick up a firearm, but they had listening to the interviews that they had in prison and young persons, how early they're pretty much recruited into these gangs and they're introduced to these types of behavior. You wonder really and truly why the system feels somebody who really didn't want to be involved in these types of, so I tend to humanize. I tend to, it's surprising how much you realize they are a person. And we always think about the victims, we always think about persons who have been harmed in some way by criminals, but on the other end of the spectrum, you see how much these criminals have been victimized in their own right. And I think that is one of the most compelling things that I've learned. That looking at dissecting their problems is necessary in society. I don't think that we take time to understand their context, their viewpoints, and try to help curb whatever situation has or harm that's happened to them in their past to make sure that some of them don't have the same outcome as especially like with those who went to remand and they have no opportunities because they were in remand for so many years, and it could have been avoided with programs within the prison. So I started to, it's surprising how much you don't realize that criminals are also human and they also face a lot of adversity.
One of the main factors around the world, if you check the research and literature, is the poverty factor, the disparity in income and wealth. From what you're saying, that seems to be consistent with what you're seeing in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes. Yes. One of the major things they pointed out, every single community, every person who I spoke to, is that we have no money. They don't care about us. There's no opportunity. We are poor. I just need $300 to buy some groceries. What could you recommend? Where do I go to see? The welfare is taking very long. I just really want to work. I don't mind working very hard. I help my community out. So poverty has been equated in a lot of areas with regards to it equates to crime. What we try to understand is those communities that has a lot of poverty that doesn't equate to crime, especially in rural areas. What are they doing differently? And so this is why we were tapping into the agricultural sector, understanding how to get them into the labor force in terms of plumbing, electrical. You could see in these communities, they're building their own homes, they're doing things that elevate, they're becoming a self-service in these rural communities. And this is one of the things that veer them away from criminality. Now, if you could foster that level of thinking within these communities, instead of picking up the arms and becoming self-sufficient and helping themselves in earning and creating businesses within these communities, we have to get that mindset, that entrepreneurship mindset in the communities. So poverty has been equated, but we have to also look at those places where there is poverty, but very low levels of criminality, and see what is being done differently. Yeah.
Dr. Malisa Neptune, thank you for being with us.
Yeah.
Appreciate your conversation.
Thank
Hoping to have you on.
Thanks a lot for the conversation.
Again, to narrow in on a particular area if you'd like, so we can continue the conversation in terms of more solutions and recommendations. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right.